So there's a heck of a lot to do during this little lockdown period. So I thought I'd make a response video to Mr. Robert Reich, who, if you don't know, he's a commentator who's definitely on the liberal side of the spectrum, and he's someone who I actually used to follow. He's got a very pleasing voice. He sounds very reassuring. Unfortunately, I think he's mostly full of shit, and unfortunately, he seems to have quite an influence over some of my friends. And well, I'd like to do something about that. At least to have them think about it a little bit. So he's got a number of videos. Unfortunately, this response, he doesn't have a video, so I'll be reading what he has said, and I'll be using this little guy to represent Mr. Reich. So let us begin. What did Mr. Reich have to say in his? He's distressed. Friends, I've been in and around politics for over half a century now, and I never imagined how low and loony the Republican Party would become. Oh dear, what could he be so upset about? Well, Mr. Reich, I don't think you should never underestimate just how loony politicians of any party can become. I mean, the Republicans by no means have a monopoly on lunacy. And wasn't it so long ago that you were speculating that Donald Trump was a Russian spy? But please do continue and tell us what these dastardly Republicans are up to these days. 11 Republican senators have said that they will vote to reject President-elect Joseph Biden Jr.'s victory next Wednesday when Congress meets to formally certify it. Well, indeed, that's correct. You know, just like when Democrat Maxine Waters objected to Trump's Electoral College vote in 2016. And California Democrat Barbara Boxer objected to George Bush in 2004. And numerous Democrats objected to George Bush in 2000. Objecting is a part of the process. It's not always used, but when those objecting, not Robert Reich, believe grounds for objections exist, and that's what's happening now. They are joining a growing movement in the GOP to defy the unambiguous results of the 2020 presidential election and support Trump's bizarre attempt to remain in power with false claims of voting fraud. Well, Mr. Reich, I don't think those words mean what you think they mean. You know, you use these words like they're magic. You say the results of 2020 are unambiguous? Well, they will continue to remain ambiguous because the many claims of voter fraud have not had an adequate hearing to either prove or disprove their factuality. You, Mr. Reich, you don't get to just declare what is a fact and what is fiction. You don't have a crystal ball. You've investigated nothing that I'm aware of, and yet you claim to know these things. It's in all our best interests to assure the integrity of an election. And the fact that you and your ilk appear so desperate to avoid any inquiry says a lot about your integrity. And it ain't good. So if the claims are false, then let them be proven false to the satisfaction of all. And then you may bask in the glory of your legitimate victory. Or not. But, you say unsubstantiated. This means no substantiation whatsoever. So, there's no way I would be able to show you video evidence of poll workers running the same ballots through counting machines multiple times in the middle of the night after they fraudulently told other poll workers to go home because of a water leak. There's no way I'd be able to show you that.
I was stunned to learn that the people at State Farm Arena, there were 5 women that worked for about 2.5 hours from just before 11 p.m. until just before 1 a.m. Scanning ballots. And the disturbing thing about it is that there were 5 of these desks with women at each of the 5 desks. And we've labeled the first one here, kind of focused on her. She's wearing a purple top, desk 1. This is at 4x speed, so we don't have to sit there and watch, it in a slower speed. But you can see that this lady is taking the same stack of ballots, and once she runs them through the scanner, there she goes. She sticks them back in and runs them a second time and a third time. And then the lady to her right, wearing the yellow top, we've got a second video that shows that she did the same thing with.
Mr. Reich, These kinds of episodes, and there are many of them, don't disappear just because you use words like unambiguous and false claims. Those are not magic words, and you are not a wizard, Mr. Reich. Remember, every state has now certified the election results after verifying their accuracy. All right, I'll remember that. But you seem to have forgotten, Mr. Reich, if you ever knew, that several states have sent two sets of electors to Washington, both Republicans and Democrats. Now, why did they do that? Curious minds want to know, but apparently you are not a curious mind, Mr. Reich. Several underwent post-election audits or hand counts. Well, yes, several of them did, and several did not. But do you mean these are the hand counts where the windows were boarded up and observers were prevented from entering the building? Do you mean the hand counts of contested ballots? I mean, counting is great, but one must also be aware of what is being counted. I think Stalin put it best. Those who vote decide nothing. Those who count the votes decide everything. And I think we may be seeing an example of it right here. At the same time, judges across America, including the Supreme Court, have rejected nearly 60 attempts by Trump and his allies to challenge the results. Yes, that is a true statement. There have been a number of cases turned away, but not over the merits of the case, but rather standing or other legalities. Nothing has been proven, disproven, or even ruled upon. None of the 11 Republican senators who say they will vote to invalidate the results of the election has made any specific allegations of fraud. At most, they offer vague statements that some wrongdoing may have occurred. Well, yeah, that's right, Mr. Reich. The reason they're making an objection is so that they can provide specifics in Congress, where Congress can do something about it, if Congress ever does something about anything. You seem to be implying, Mr. Reich, that they're objecting without any reason at all, like they're having a little hissy fit. If you really believe that, I mean, you're more out to lunch than I even thought. If some wrongdoing has occurred, then everyone, including you, Mr. Reich, should be interested in hearing these objections, not just declaring them false and walking around like a pigeon declaring itself the victor of a chess game. I mean, come on, let's get real. The most specific grounds for contesting the certification is that many of their supporters believe Trump's claims of fraud, which is a circular form of reasoning since Trump and many of these same senators have been arguing since the election that fraud occurred without offering any evidence. Well, here you are just a goddamn liar. You are the one making a circular reasoning, Mr. Reich. The most specific grounds are video evidence and other evidence of wrongdoing, as the example I showed previously. Those are the most specific grounds. The senators are not objecting because people are upset. Being upset is nothing. It's just an emotional outburst, which is about all you're doing, Mr. Reich. The sedition of these 11 United States senators, and I use that term advisedly, will not alter the outcome of the election. Well, if you're using the term advisedly, then I would suggest whoever is advising you is a moron. If sedition is defined as rebellion against the authority of the state, then the senators' objections cannot be sedition, because their objections are following the process prescribed by the Constitution. That is to say, the document that confers the authority of the state. But if that's your definition of sedition, Mr. Reich, then why was it in 2016 that you yourself called for electors to vote against their pledge? Now that's going far beyond merely objecting, but an open call to rebellion. So are you against sedition or not, Mr. Reich? I believe it's a hanging offense. Don't get my hopes up. It's purely for show, as have been so much of Trump and his enablers' actions, but the show itself will be a brawl that will only serve to validate in the minds of many Trump supporters his baseless claims, dividing America even more. Well, I'm not sure America can get divided even more, but Mr. Reich, the purpose of the show is to demand that the claims be given proper consideration to determine whether they are baseless or not. Sorry, I'm not prepared to take your word for it. Neither you, nor CNN, nor factcheckmyass.com are the arbiters of what is or is not baseless. The one consolation, if it can be called that, is that their cynical ploy will also force other Republican members of Congress to openly choose between doing their constitutional duty and accepting the results of the election, or displaying brazenly loyalty to a fading demagogue who has sought to turn the GOP into a personal cult. In short, between democracy and fascism. Oh yes, I knew this we were heading here. Well, you said a mouthful, Mr. Reich, but wrong as usual. Since the senators will be doing their constitutional duty by objecting, if they have objections, that is exactly what they're required to do. And as for the demagogue's personal cult of fascism, of the 14 characteristics as defined by political scientist Lawrence Britt, a cult of personality is not an aspect of fascism. However, a controlled media and rigged elections are. Now, we certainly have a controlled media that is putting the kibosh on any kinds of discussion like I'm making now. And whether or not we have rigged elections, well, we don't really know. I don't know. You don't know. Let's find out. But since you don't want to find out, since you want to shut it down, who's the fascist here, Mr. Reich? Reich. Interesting name. Well, we're going to find out what happens tomorrow, I guess, when they do their little hearing. One thing I can be quite sure of is that Mr. Reich will be having another hissy fit. And I don't know. I think we'll take a break from responding to it because I've quite had enough of this. Have you? Yeah? Okay. Well, let's put it to bed. Sun's going down. It's a great day. And let the show go on. Peace out.